Hey guys, welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider. Man, I have a treat for you today. You guys love the generative AI topics, and the videos that I put out there on generative AI are always the one that are hit the most. We do discuss about the truth of cloud computing and juice of generative AI, including where the evolution of the technology is going, and really getting to the point of the fact we're getting by some of the confusion that's now. If you're in this industry, you've seen the world that is generative AI, and you've seen it change a lot in the last couple of years. You've heard people talk about it on the network news. People have talked about it at work. You may be in the middle of a project right now, but lots of confusion around how we're using this technology and what the technology means. And I'm loving the fact that we're getting two experts on the show today. We're going to take us through some of the myths that we have and really kind of debunking some of the stuff and providing some expert opinions in terms of how this stuff is going to be done, how this stuff is going to be leveraged. So joining me today is Jeremy Williford and Mindy Cancila. So Jeremy, give us an introduction to yourself.
Thanks, David. My name is Jeremy Williford. I work with NVIDIA. I've had really the blessing of working with NVIDIA since '98. Since NVIDIA had about 60 people. So 26 years at NVIDIA, and I've had the pleasure of working with Dell as my mission with the company for the past 20 years. So I've really been fortunate in that I have a founder-led company at NVIDIA and a founder-led company at Dell and a couple great leaders. So an extremely exciting time in the market. So I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, and people don't realize NVIDIA is such an older brand. It's funny, I was going through old PC Magazine where I wrote an article back in the 90s, and there was an NVIDIA ad. And so, yeah, it was amazing to me. It's
issue 21. We were always, gunning for issue 21. That was like the big issue of the year that had everyone on their, excitement. So I remember that well.
I was working in ZD Labs. I was the one running the benchmarks and writing the stories about that and be doing the editor's choice. And I don't know, it seems it's amazing to me that we have a company that is reinventing themselves many different times around the utilization of technology, and certainly NVIDIA is kind of the poster child of that. So appreciate you having you on. Mindy?
Yeah, hi, Dave. Nice to be here today. So Mindy Cancila, I'm a VP in our corporate strategy office at Dell. I'd like to say that I've grown up in the server business and the IT side. I started at Compaq to fully date myself. Joined Dell in the early 2000s, worked at Gartner for a bit as a cloud analyst. And I've been back at Dell for a couple of years now, covering all things generative AI, as you could imagine, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I teach a generative AI architecture class, and one of the things I do in that class is, and there's 4 hours of class time every week, and take a lot of question and answers. I just dispel myths, that everybody has about this stuff. And it seems it's weird. You would think that everybody would have the answers since they have access to generative AI systems like ChatGPT. But there's just a ton of confusion out there to a point. It's very much like, it's worse than the cloud was back in the late, 2008, 2009 timeframe, where people were just assigning, too much power to it, didn't understand the reason for it, didn't understand how to leverage it, didn't know how to put it in its proper perspective. And that's why I'm grateful for this talk. So let's get right into the myths. I mean, because I think this is, we got a few of them to go through. And I think these are key to us understanding the power of the technology and how to use it correctly. And also the fact that, it does some things well and it doesn't do some other things well. And I think it's good to understand both aspects of that. So the first myth, and I'm going to go to you first, Jeremy, generative AI is only for tech companies.
Yeah, that's, in your illustration, that's almost similar to saying that the web was only for, online companies. And it was clear that that's not the case, right? It became conditioned to understand that everyone had to use it. Generative AI is in the same bucket. We have a lot of tech companies that are out there early as adopters and putting it to good use. But we also have a mountain of enterprise customers that are coming and recognizing that their business needs to rely on a factor of generative AI. It's going to improve productivity. It's going to improve their ability to do customer service. So there's a lot of things that are in that. And, I tell people all the time, there's either one or two companies. You're either Blockbuster or you're Netflix. You saw what happened in that situation. It's the same with generative AI. Either you're using this technology to move your company forward, or somebody else will and replace you in that position.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a point where this stuff is going to be leveraged as an innovative differentiator that's going to take lots of companies to the next level. We're going to have them defined at. We're going to see the next generation of the Netflix and the Airbnbs and the Ubers around their utilization of this technology. You just see this stuff coming. What are your thoughts, Mindy? Just for tech companies?
No way. So very much like Jeremy said, I mean, I think this is sort of like saying, the use of technology is only for IT organizations. We know that's not true. You look at the early use cases that we already see in organizations, and they span all types of disciplines. And so it's really about finding those right use cases and figuring out how to leverage those benefits. The early numbers that we saw promise as much as 30% increase in productivity. Whether or not that number is true, it's too large of a number for anyone to not pay attention to. So I 100% believe this will be massively disruptive for all organizations, enterprises, verticals.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, this is about taking your business to the next level, like Jeremy put, and it's going to be for everybody's use. And I do see adoption certainly well outside the technology space, probably more so than other technologies in the past, because they see the value in it, they see the productivity that can be gained on it. And so, whether you're developing new systems or you're leveraging the technology, there's value to be seen there. So, next myth: success of Gen AI efforts relies on the quality of AI large language models, or LLM. Jeremy, I'll go to you again. What do you think?
Wow, the large language models play a pivotal role in the whole, generation of what's going on right now in this industrial revolution. They are very critical. However, what we're seeing is that there's a ton of, smaller language models where there's a ton of, base foundation where you're using an AI foundation, kind of like a large language model, but you're putting your own data structures on top of it. And really the success, you are using a lot of large language models, but the success of your own private model depends on the data you're putting in and what you're able to add to that. Or companies that want to use smaller domain specific models are doing fantastic because they're very tailored to, a biomedical field, or they're very tailored to, a lawyer or some kind of firm that's doing law and needs an analysis done on that. So there's all kinds of ways and methodologies. But yeah, large language models will play a part, but there will be several other iterations of how companies will use this.
Well put. Mindy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I again would agree with Jeremy, but I would really lean into the data. I think about all of the things that we're doing with generative AI. They're sort of an extension of what we've always done with automation. And I used to work with organizations when we talked in the early days about automating things, and we would often say, automating broken processes will just break things really quickly. And the same is true with generative AI. So if you have a garbage in, you're going to get a garbage out type of model. So I think it's really important that people think about the data that they're feeding the models themselves, the quality of that data. But as Jeremy said, it's not just the model itself. It's sort of everything in that entire stack.
Yeah, you guys really have some pragmatic points to this, and I think this is the single most hindrance that people are not moving into generative AI systems because they don't view as having the knowledge and understanding of existing data sets to leverage it. And at the end of the day, there's so many ways you can work around that stuff. So the quality of the data and the utilization of the data is going to be foundational to you building a quality knowledge model, small language model, large language model. It doesn't matter. But Jeremy just talked about things we can put our data, we can leverage it in different ways, we can leverage it being RAG. There's lots of different dynamic ways in which we can fit these things, utilize our existing data sets. Having quality data there, that's going to be important, but the ability to get these things in process now is absolutely imperative. So next one would be larger language models. LLMs are always better. Bigger is always better. What do you think, Jeremy?
No, it goes back to really what your AI outcome that you want to go achieve is. And if you're very broad in nature for your outcome, there's a different broad set of structures you can go use, and large language models help with that. At NVIDIA, what we've done is we've really tried to focus on delivery of what we call microservices. The idea that you're going to put a microservice on top of a large language model such that a user can easily interact with it. Just as you teach that class in generative AI, we don't have enough practitioners around the industry right now to really grab a lot of these things. So what we're trying to do at NVIDIA and working with Dell is deliver packages that make it easy for these enterprise customers to adopt a large language model, put a microservice on top of it that yields the output they're looking for. And then all of a sudden that becomes a more easy way to interact with it. And then you can choose on what model you have. And we give a plethora of models and choices to make it easy for the end customer. But that's kind of how we think about large language models and how to make them adaptable and achievable by any enterprise.
Yeah, the one thing I heard when the generative AI first started, when I was doing my role as a consultant, people would call me in. They go, "I want to build ChatGPT for banking, a ChatGPT for healthcare, and ChatGPT and for this." And I was like, "Well, okay, that takes 12 days and $12 million to train. So we may have to talk about some sort of a fallback position here on utilizing this stuff is going to actually return some value." What are your thoughts, Mindy?
Yeah, I would sort of say the same. I mean, when you think about, well, first let me say, I think it depends on who you are. If you're a large language provider, then yeah, bigger models are better because you're going to have higher accuracy, but they're going to come at a price tag. And you hit the nail on the head, Dave. It's like, how much do you really want to pay for this? You know, we kind of get in this mode, and I'm speaking as a Texan, bigger and more is always better until it's not, right? It's really great to have more data that you make things more accurate until you hit the diminishing return. Well, what is that diminishing return? Depends on your use case. If I'm a smaller organization, I don't need the largest of models with, you know, I kind of go back to the SLA days. We used to say, you know, I could pay for, you know, I need 9 nines of security until I need to pay for that. It's like, well, actually, just kidding. I need like 5 nines of security. It's sort of the same concept. So I think there's a world for both. That's not me just being sort of flippant, but I think that we're seeing the market bifurcate where you're going to see large language model providers. And for them, the largest and most robust, they're, by the way, more costly. They're more difficult to maintain. As Jeremy said earlier, they require the skills versus you're going to see a set of use cases that emerge where a smaller, less accurate model will be a lot better than what you had and probably good enough.
Yeah. And that's, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
I was going to add on to what Mindy said. I mean, the reality is if you're a drug discovery company, you're going to want to build a model that's really specific to the drugs that you're trying to discover and really thinking through that. And your IP is going to be around that, and you're going to have to invest in that to get that outcome. Or if you're a company that wants to do sovereign AI and build a large language model for, for South Korea and want to make sure that is very, sensitive to their own language structure. Yeah, you're going to want to make sure that you're building that from scratch if it hasn't been built before. So I totally am aligned with Mindy on how you think about that is really critical to the business you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and this is
We're
absolutely
going to have to get one of these that we disagree upon at some point.
Well, the thing is, it comes in, it's not really disagreement. It's the ability to kind of look at where this stuff is going and look at the different adoption patterns that are going to make sense for the business. And so it's never going to be, one of these things, everybody's moving to large language models, everybody's small language models, everybody's moving agentic. That's never going to be the case. It's about solving the particular business problems and ways you need to solve it. And you guys have good foundational, knowledge in that. And that's something we talk about on the show all the time, and the ability to put some architectural forethought and some planning in building these things. Sometimes it's going to be leveraging and sometimes building large language models, not a very few times in doing that. We're certainly going to leverage them from our existing systems, including our generative AI systems. Jeremy talked about the big tiering systems where we have our own small language models which interact with a large language model on the back end. And we're just heading to this thing where it's going to be integration of many different technologies. They're going to be aligned specifically to the business. And it's that's where people are going to find the value of generative AI very quickly. I always tell people you need to find the value within 6 months. This cannot be a 2-year, 3-year project that costs $100 million. This needs to be something that has very tactical value that comes back to the business very quickly. And you can build on those successes and you can get to these bigger, more aggressive projects, but it's only going to come when you built upon the value of things you built in the past. So
David, the only mistake you would make is not doing it. It is exactly what you described. It's if you do not make a decision, if you don't start looking at it, if you don't have something in the next 6 months, you will be falling behind. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that that time to decision, we also call it time to first token, right? The time where you're making that happen is really critical to your business right now. Is investing that time and understanding of what's going on and how to go use it.
Yeah, well put. And I think that the ability to understand your business first and back the appropriate technology in it is a step that we need to take. And by the way, we missed that with the adoption of cloud computing. So many times people were applying cloud-based systems where they shouldn't be. And now we're in the process of fixing a lot of those. And I spent a good part of my career in the last 10 years fixing a lot of those. Now we have the opportunity to put the planning in place to kind of knock this stuff out of the park with technology that's going to have 10 times the value when it's deployed. That's the exciting thing about it. It's a game changer for some of these business. Last minute thoughts on this, Mindy?
Yeah, I mean, I would build on what Jeremy said, get started, right? I would actually say if you haven't already gotten started, you already are behind. So, I mean, I know that we are one of those tech companies. So we've been at this for 2 years. We've already, I mentioned the example of automating broken processes breaks things faster. That's where we started. We started looking at really mapping out our processes and streamlining those so that we could simplify them, so that we could automate them, so that we could apply generative AI. And that's absolutely what I would recommend for organizations.
Well put. You guys understand this very well. So next one, do you need data scientists to be successful with Gen AI? Great myth. Jeremy, what do you think?
Listen, I think that a lot of times customers don't, enterprises look at it and say, hey, I don't have the technical resources to do this. I don't have that. What I will say though is, this market is evolving very quickly. We at NVIDIA, we spent about 70% of our engineering force is all software engineering. So we spend the broad amount of our time developing tools. From your days at PC Mag, right? We've always been an ecosystem developer. And just as we gave, game developers and everybody else tools to go create these structures, we are doing the same thing with generative AI. We're building structures and tools to make it easy for people to understand how to go implement this stuff. You're always going to need data scientists as you refine your tools, as you build on them, as you want to expand it. I think that will actually just come with it. We'll do a market lift on trying to make more resources available to do that. So yes, it's great to have a data scientist. No, you don't have to get them to start. You should get started. But once you get started, you're going to want to see the value of them and come back with them. We're going to continue to build tools and offerings, just like Dell does, of making sure customers understand how to go meet the technology where it is and making it easy for everyone. That's why we're big on what we did with NIMs, these NEMO microservices that are NVIDIA microservices that allow you to just interact with this technology almost in a drag and drop type fashion.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see that. So Mindy, do we need a data scientist?
Well, I think in some cases you do. So I think there's, you go back to those use cases. If you're one of those that's building large language models, if you have those use cases Jeremy talked about, you're in, really extensive research, you're probably going to benefit. Regardless, I would say you would benefit from the skills that a data scientist would bring. Do you have to have it if you're broad strokes enterprise? Probably not. At the core, I think you're looking for some software development expertise, but I also think we're in early days. I think as these technologies mature and as organizations become more familiar with them, we'll see the democratization of the need for some of these really expensive, hard to come by skills. And we may even get to a point that, packaged solutions come with data science agents that can do some of that back end work for you. So that's obviously futuristic looking, but I think today it really depends. Large organizations that are really trying to stand up these models probably do. Most enterprise organizations, no, I think that they'll benefit from what comes out of the generative AI use cases as they put the effort in to learn how to do prompt engineering and to upskill their organization. And I actually think that needs to be done everywhere. So if you play that out and you believe that's true, the only world that doesn't happen is if everybody in your company is a data scientist. So I think we're actually sort of on a journey for everybody to become a little bit more tech savvy with what this looks like. And I also look forward to the technology becoming more approachable so that it's easier for everybody to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. The thing is, data scientists are going to be needed based on the requirements of the system that you're looking to build. Sometimes you need a few good people to understand how to deal with very complex data sets and turn it into training data that's going to be used to build quality knowledge models. But for the wide array of projects that I'm involved with, you don't need to go that deep in the data. The data is, if it's in a good shape, it's in a good format and a structure we can understand. We have middleware systems that are able to push it into a training scenario, and we have a lot of tools and certainly AI-driven tools to make that happen. We don't need, in many instances, huge amounts of expertise to make these things work. We're able to do it with very minimum viable tools, and they work well. So some of the projects I brought in, They have one person who's charged with understanding the data, but they're definitely not data scientists. Other projects are going to need 6 of them, that have these deep data capabilities. And so it's the it depends thing that people don't get. They think that by law I have to have 6 data scientists on this, and they all have to have PhDs in order for this thing to work. That's not the real world these days. So next myth.
Well, I would like to add one more comment there.
Sure.
I would suggest, look, Dell has a great set of consultative services that we like to promote. We also, we have a host of GSIs that we all work with. In fact, Jensen was just on stage with Julie Sweet talking about Accenture's new ability to offer consultative services. I do think there's going to be just as in the early days of the web where there's a few specialists that were really good and really advanced companies quick. I do feel like bringing in consultative services practices from Dell, practices from GSIs, really does a lot to help companies get a little further on in that early stage activations with the use cases and driving those. So I think those are actually just as important of having on-prem people as knowing which companies to work with to get your own use cases, kind of at full scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would take an opportunity to build upon that, if I may. Since you mentioned the consultative services from Dell, a lot of that is built on what we learned from implementing this ourselves. So we like to talk about ourselves as customer zero and think about the challenges that we went through. We're a large organization. We have a lot of employees. We're global. There's massive impact based on the things that we end up making decisions to do or not to do. And so that effort I talked about, streamlining our processes, that started more than a year ago. Michael was very passionate about really leaning into generative AI and using it to modernize and transform the company. And that really started with, we're a 40-year company. We've grown over the decades and bolted things on. And so getting back to the roots of how do you streamline those processes? A lot of those consultative services are intended to help you identify those, but it really comes back to based on the use cases that are going to drive the most value. I know, David, you said you need to be seeing a 6-month window of where you get that ROI. That's really important to have, that help so that organizations can lean into what are the right use cases, how do I prioritize these, and where and how do I get started?
Yeah, great advice. I mean, you got to be able to do for yourself before you do for others, and I think consulting is a prime example of that. Having been in that space for half my career. So the next myth: you need to create your own model from scratch. I love this one. And Mindy, I'm going to go to you first, then I'll go to Jeremy in reverse order.
Sure. So I love to use the franchise analogy when I think about building large language models. So should you build your own if you're a provider? Absolutely. If you're not a provider, you probably don't need to. As a matter of fact, I would pretty strongly encourage you not to. The models are becoming so capable. There's such a breadth of offerings and choices out there in market. Now, that's where you might need some help to choose the right one for you. Back to the earlier conversation about consultative services and deciding where to get started. But I would not recommend any enterprise organization start by trying to build their own model. Again, bringing that back to the franchise example, it's sort of like you have the ability as a startup to, instead of building everything from scratch, coming to somebody that's already framed that for you, and you can consume that and then tailor and make it your own based on your use cases. So absolutely do not believe that everybody should be building their own models.
I love that. Jeremy?
I love Mindy's comments, but at NVIDIA, we'd love for everyone to build their own models. But the reality is, as Mindy said, you don't have to, and it's a very cost intensive thing to go do. There'll be companies out there that will build their own models that will do amazing structural things. They will change the way we do business globally. So that's fantastic. To Mindy's point, there's tons of opportunities. The good news is a lot of people are investing in these. Your better bet as an enterprise customer is making sure that your data structures that sit on top of those models are well structured, that they're, even if it's unstructured data, that you're having a good flow for it. You have good guardrails put in place. You have good checks and balances to make sure there's no hallucinations. You're doing all the things you should be doing as a good steward of, your own data structures on top of the models. That's where people really need to spend their time and their energy for most enterprises. And then if you want to change the world, go build a model. There's tons of people out there doing it.
Yeah, I always tell people in my generative AI architecture course, always use other people's work. So, the one thing you don't want to do is build something and figure out, and certainly build a LLM and find out somebody else has built it. And if you look in the industrial space, the number of industrial specific LLMs, whether it's banking, healthcare, diagnostic, things like that, they're starting to flood the market. And chances are, if it doesn't exist now, it will in a few months. And I would hate to build a model that someone else is able to build and someone is in that business, and where I'm not in that business, being a practitioner, healthcare practitioner, a bank, things like that. So people need to kind of adjust their thinking. And the fact you're trying to create as little from scratch as you can, use as much other people's work as you can, and just extend the things that are needed on top of it. So next myth, GenAI is best hosted in the public cloud. These are getting better. So what do you think, Jeremy?
I want to give Mindy's first. I mean, come on, this is Dell answering this question. I want to hear what Mindy says. Then I'm going to go on this second on this one.
Sure, I'm happy to go first on this one. As a past cloud analyst, I have a lot of thoughts here that we could talk for probably hours about. But I will lean into two of Dell's core beliefs. One is that generative AI is all about the data, and a second one is that you should bring the AI to the data, not the other way around. The reason that becomes important is we don't want to be moving a bunch of data, the cost, the security concerns, and then just the latency of having many hops across the different models. And so when I think about should everything be in public cloud, absolutely not. I tend to think cloud is fit for purpose, and I think there are some use cases that make more sense to be in public cloud, and there are some that are going to make more sense to be on premises. One more thought on that. I was talking with some customers not too long ago, and we were talking about the different types of use cases that we see coming to life. And I'll talk about two that we've seen within Dell. One is an engineering use case, and one is a marketing use case. The marketing use case was using already public data. No reason to be moving that data around. It's already in the cloud. Do that in the public cloud. That second one that was an engineering use case is based on our IP. We are absolutely not going to put that in a public model. And so that is a great example of where the use cases are really going to drive that placement and what makes the most sense. And then the last comment on that is I think you have to think about the cost. So as a cloud analyst, I worked with a lot of organizations that, and David, as you said, they came into the cloud and they thought everything, I'm going to shut down my data centers and 100% of things are going to go into the cloud. And we're finding a much more pragmatic and balanced view there. And cost. And obviously, I would encourage organizations to make sure they understand that cost structure and what that looks like beyond just the security of the data.
Great answer. Jeremy?
Oh, that was a good answer. I knew she'd give a good one, so I wanted to build upon what she said. Listen, I do think that there's definitely a place for the cloud. You can see that a lot of the early adopters are, utilizing the cloud structures because they're available and the full stack offering is there. And the danger of that, though, is to the cost point. Once you have selected a cloud vendor, if you are on their platform, there's a high danger that that's where your stuff's going to live in perpetuity, because the fact is pulling it down becomes so expensive. And we've seen that with a bunch of enterprise customers, that once they get into that structure, it's very difficult to move that structure. Now your business is dependent on them. So one of the things that we do at NVIDIA is we really talk about making sure you're using a full stack of software that is capable of being moved. So you want to own the stack of software that's being used wherever you're using it. If you're starting in the cloud, great, start in the cloud, but have a stack of software and a set of utilities that allow you to move it simply back on-prem whenever the cost justifications work out for that. So as an end user, you really have to have in mind, how you want to structure this long-term for growth, and that you're not pigeonholing yourself into one particular offering in the cloud. NVIDIA is very big on making sure that our full stack offering is available in the cloud. It's available on-prem with Dell. It's available, through multiple offerings in that way. And we want customers to have the ability to move that structure if they see fit. And so we're big on, how we view the cloud. There's a definite place for it. I think there's a hybrid cloud environment for many of the folks, but I also think with 83% of the world's data sitting on-prem right now, that a lot of companies are going to want to see that as their IP, and they're going to keep it on-prem in order to build their value proposition. So that's the way we think about it.
Yeah, that's great. The only thing I have to add, the path of least resistance to AI, certainly generative AI, is going to be through the cloud, because you get an ecosystem, it's on demand, you're able to build and deploy these things. However, that's when the value has a tendency to stop, because once you get into an operation mode, it's also very expensive to run it on these things a number of times. So there's other options. You can leverage micro clouds that are just focused on delivering NVIDIA as a service. That seems to be a thing out there now, through smaller cloud providers, or the ability to focus on whatever the best platform is for running the thing that's going to bring in the best value. Who would have thought that would be a good idea? And so sometimes it's going to be the cloud, sometimes it's not going to be the cloud. And your ability to kind of go through this analysis is going to pay dividends, because lots of people made the mistake. That's why we're repatriating a lot of workloads and data sets right now. So when you platform this thing, you figure out the infrastructure you need to make it happen. You need to figure out that the infrastructure is going to bring the most value back to the business. Who cares if it's cloud, not cloud, a managed service provider, a colo provider, or a micro cloud? It doesn't really matter. So it's finding the best platform. I guess what's good for you, Jeremy, every time whatever platform you pick, NVIDIA is going to be there. So it runs everywhere now.
We're trying to make sure that people get to see our options. And look, there's a lot of competition in the market, and even our cloud partners, they have a lot of their own internal structures that they like to use for customers. But again, once you're on those internal structures from those cloud providers, it's very difficult to move or change. So understanding your future, we work with Dell a lot, and they think about these structures and how to make sure that everything they build is in an open environment where they're not kind of pigeonholed into one solution. So yeah, good point, David.
Absolutely. I think it's ultimately where everything is going. Ubiquitous computing, heterogeneous computing, and your ability to pick the best platform for the job. And I think that's where everything needs to flow to right now. So next myth would be implementing Gen AI is cost prohibitive. Minnie, I'm going to go to you first.
Actually flip that and say, I don't think you can afford not to do it. I mean, with all the things we've talked about and the way that this is disrupting every industry and the things that we're already starting to see that are just really innovative solutions. So can't afford not to do it. But within that, I think it's super important that organizations take the time to understand not only their TCO, but the ROI for those specific workloads. We talked earlier about the days of cloud where people rush to the cloud and had a set of expectations as to what things might look like. I hope that we all learn from some of those mistakes and are more pragmatic in the upfront planning. I see a lot of tops down coordination around AI use cases and workloads, but I don't always see them going all the way through to proving out that ROI and thinking through, as you just said, David, what is it going to cost in terms of the types of solutions that I deploy? The other thing I would say is I think we're in the early days, right? I mean, the cost structure looks like one thing today, but as these models mature, as they become more performant, more power performant in particular, they become a little bit easier to deploy. We see the emergence of smaller models, which we're already seeing. Those may be able to run things that are much less cost prohibitive. So if you don't get started now, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that cost efficiency that we anticipate seeing over time, but really important to build out that TCO.
Well put, Jeremy.
Well, I think there's a couple dynamics going on in the market right now, right? I think that what we're seeing is everyone recognizes the need for accelerated computing. And accelerated computing is where you're doing all of this work for generative AI. If you look around most of the enterprise data centers today, though, they don't have those accelerated, computing footprints in their own data center. So I think what companies will have to start doing is, if we look at Moore's law ending, and the data center structures that they have in place, they're not getting the more performance out of those data center structures. I think companies need to start thinking about their own, on-prem data center and thinking, okay, how do we make this a dual purpose AI and accelerated computing structure that's helping us do our daily work as well, and really start thinking about the platform that they have on-prem to go off and drive these things. And then at the same time, where do they need to use cloud resources for it? How do they need to think about a vision for their own owning this own structure? There's a lot of dynamics here. To Mindy's point, you're making a bad decision if you're not making a decision on this. So you need to really have a mindset for what it would take to build on-prem structures, what cloud services you need, and really defining a future for that. And that's what we're seeing in NVIDIA right now. We see a lot of companies literally changing their own IT infrastructure into a accelerated platform that can do multiple things better than what their current IT and facilities do.
Yeah, and the way I see it, if you think generative AI is cost prohibitive for the problems you're looking to solve, you're probably not doing it correctly. And so there's
Mhm.
efficiencies that need to be looked at in terms of how you're platforming things and sizing things and scoping things and picking the right domain and things like that. And that seems to be the issue right now. So people are trying to bite off way more than they can chew. So businesses, again, trying to build ChatGPT for whatever they're doing, and they're realizing they're going to have to retrench down into something that's a little bit more tactically, narrowly focused. That's going to have some better cost advantages, and I think that's just something it's a learning process that we're going through right now. Now people are focused on smaller language models, working with large language models, agentic-based development, things like that. And I think that's focused in the right way. People are going to be successful with that, and those are not going to be cost prohibitive. But it is if you're going out there to try to do this big honking thing, which everybody was trying to do a couple of years ago, which isn't going to be pragmatic. So the next myth, Gen AI understands context just like humans. Minnie, I'll go to you first again.
No way. I think human in the loop is the most important part of this. We're seeing that, first of all, the technology is still nascent, right? It's maturing, but it's still nowhere near ready to be just fully automated and hands off. I had a fascinating demo from a company yesterday that's building an analyst agent. And even in that, they were showing all the things that they could do behind the scenes. And the gentleman who was doing the demo made the point, at one point, it sort of stopped, it halted in the demo, and he was like, oh, I need to go give it some feedback. And he said, but this is actually much like what it would be in your actual work environment. This is like when you have junior employees that come in and they need guidance and direction. These models are exactly the same. They still require human intervention.
Jeremy?
That's a great point. I think that if we look at some of the stuff NVIDIA does, as I said, we're primarily a software company, and we've turned to using software-generated AI that helps us to improve efficiencies. But there's always human in the loop in that structure that knows what they're building and how, what the outputs are. It's amazing how much more productivity we have. But at the same time, we always need human in the loop to really continue to refine it and make it better. I would suggest to all companies, your best bet is to start using generative AI internally to your structure, right? So all the internal use cases, so you can understand it, so you can start playing with the guardrails, you start playing with what outputs you're getting, what needs to be refined. Those are fantastic ways to make progress towards offerings and more productivity that you're going to find out of it. So yes, humans in the loop are critical. Secondly, just begin to start using the technology so that you can understand where your company is engaging with it.
And I would just add to that, I mean, the things that these agents were able to do, they're pretty sophisticated already. So while I'm saying that, we're still in the emerging phases, they can do a lot. They just aren't completely autonomous. So, will we ever get there? That's a philosophical question, but they just continuously get better. And the more that you leverage them, provide the inputs, and do the human in the loop, the better they get. So I think I completely agree with Jeremy.
Yeah, you have to remember that at the end of the day, when you teach AI, people are often taken back by the limitations of it. In other words, they get the science fiction thing, 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it's going to try to kill us, or Skynet and things like that. And those capabilities really aren't there. And you have to have human intervention, human interaction, the ability to create net new ideas, things like that. Still can't do that. Probably won't be able to do that for a long period of time. So they're there to facilitate humans. They're there to make us better. They're there to make us more productive. They're there to remove our workday, hours from our workday, at least hopefully. And so we're always going to need to have the humans in the loop for this stuff. And that's going to be a large part of building these systems. And I think once people get into generative AI or other AI deployments, they realize this is not going to be a wholesale replacement of the human race. So next myth, Gen AI security is only about data privacy. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's not at all. I mean, look, the data privacy is a huge element of what we're trying to make sure we do here. And, in that we have to have really robust models that, protect the data structures that we're seeing. And we have to do a lot of access control on this. So we have to think about these things. And those are great problems to solve for accelerated computing. It really does a good job to make sure, and you have to have a plan for this, right? You have to build structures in such a way that you're thinking about these. It's funny because whenever we do there's a training methodology called adversarial neural networks. So it's basically putting two AI structures against each other to find the holes and the leaks. That's what you're going to be doing to make sure that your security structures are in the right place whenever you're building these products, because you're going to want to make sure you're testing against something that can come against it. No different than what you're doing today, right? What you're doing today is you're thinking about cybersecurity in a big way. As you build these models and as you put them into production, you really need to think about how to handle that information in such a way that it's protected as it goes forward. And the tools and the structures we put in place do a pretty good job of that.
Great. Mindy?
I'd build upon that and say, absolutely, it's about data privacy, but it's an and, right? It's about data privacy and all of the other facets. So when you think about security, going back to that earlier example, if you end up in a world where every person in your company is using agents to offload some of the tasks that they do, all of a sudden, every one of them is a manager. And now you have a whole different set of things that could go wrong potentially, right? So that's just a really extreme example of something that's way beyond data privacy, but it's like the people, the users, what they have access to. How do you protect your company from the types of attacks that could be inbound? And then how do you protect and enable the people in your organization to leverage the technology in a successful way? So I think data privacy is critical and key. But it's only one facet of the broader story. You've got to think about compliance and regulations, et cetera.
Yeah, and AI makes security fun because now there's a whole bunch of new attack vectors you have to consider, but they're not necessarily unknown. We've been dealing with AI security for the last 30 years, and the ability to deal with different attack vectors and the ability to secure the models, things like that is something we've known how to do. We've been doing machine learning for a long time and deep learning for a long time. So those security models are going to be around. We just have to think differently. We have to put security planners in place that understand how to protect it. Sometimes I see systems where only the training data is protected and encrypted and nothing within the model is protected and encrypted. And once the model is created, that's in essence patterns of the data that are re-understood and people are able to leverage it. That's the data, guys. That's the stuff we're supposed to be protecting. So it is thinking differently, but not necessarily having to reinvent the complete wheel around security, I think, moving forward. So in our last myth, IT teams are responsible for making Gen AI successful. That's a big one. So Mindy, I'll go to you first.
I would say yes, but I would say not yes in isolation. So I think IT is best when enabling the business to do the things that they need to do. I've seen it within Dell. We've worked very closely with our Dell IT organization as we've looked at different types of solutions, tried to figure out the right platforms and the ecosystem to pull together to enable the use cases that we're building. We truly are a business partner to those use cases. It's interesting, of the four predominant use cases within Dell, IT directly for the purpose of IT isn't one of them yet. And so when you think about that, it is 100% our job and therefore our responsibility to help enable the businesses to leverage generative AI in a safe and effective way for the company. It means working across legal. It means understanding, the regulatory and compliance requirements. It means understanding users and who should have access to what. But it goes beyond that. It also means training. That those software developers, back to our first myth about needing software developers or data scientists, often those folks are in IT organizations. And that means it is upon us to sort of help upskill the organization. Everybody becomes a prompt engineer, right? These are the types of examples, where I really do think IT becomes a partner.
Absolutely. Jeremy?
Well, here's what I'm seeing on this one. The fact of the matter is most businesses, whenever they develop their AI use cases, it usually comes from a business leader, a leader that says, hey, this is what I'd like to do. And for as great as our IT organizations are, the reality is those ideas, the concepts of what the art of the possible could be with AI use cases within a company, they're going to come from all different vectors. And the reality is, IT is going to have to learn quickly on how to go build these structures, maintain them, how to go influence. So they'll have a huge influence on how it actually gets operated. But I think the groundswell of ideas and everything else will come from thought leaders throughout the company, C-level suites, business leaders. It'll come from marketing leads, people that understand the tasks they're given and how to go. They have a thought on how it could be automated or how it could be improved with generative AI. Those are things that are going to come back to IT, and IT is going to be responsible for delivering them. And so I think IT is going to have to go through a tremendous transformation now on, you know, the not your standard SAP x86 delivery program, but now how to go take, you know, cold storage data and turn it into a profit pool for the company. And then how to, you know, every time you do a prompt, now you're going to have to store that data, and you're going to structure that to where you know exactly what you said when you said it. And those are all massive IT problems to go off and work on, but it is also business transformational. But where those ideas come from, I think that's the open field right now. I love the fact, David, that you're teaching this. I don't think we have enough teaching going on in the university structures right now. The whole world's changing. And so, you know, hearing that you're doing that real time is fantastic.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly right. This is going to be a partnership with IT leadership, as well as people working with the stakeholders in the company and even the investors, because a lot of this stuff comes down to strategic decisions that are being made, making investments that the company has probably never made before. However, I agree with you, Jeremy, that the IT is going to be on the hook to make it happen. That's always the way it works. And so they're going to need the resources, they're going to need the talent to take things to the next level. So anyway, it's a great conversation. It was a fantastic, I think, enlightening, and I love your perspectives on these myths, and I think everybody who was watching the show benefited from it as well. So before we sign off, Jeremy, where can we find more information about NVIDIA?
NVIDIA.com. I mean, but the good thing is we tell the entire world our strategy. Jensen's on stage no fewer than 200 times a year, and he'll tell everybody exactly what we're doing. We have a lot of exciting things going on in NVIDIA. I'm super excited. You know, we didn't even get into it, but I think digital twin and everything that we're doing around robotics and industry transformations, those are fantastic stuff. We tell the world what we're doing and the strategies we implement for it. There's always opportunities to learn what the next wave is looking like for NVIDIA.
And Mindy, where can we find out more about Dell's story around AI?
Sure, Dell.com/AI. And, you know, similarly, you'll see Michael often with Jensen, but also everywhere he is, he's talking about all things AI. He's talking not only about the things that we're doing within the company itself, when we talk about our AI4 strategy, but also the things that we're doing in our products, the things that we're doing with solutions and with our partners to bring a full AI factory stack to enterprises to help them start on their generative AI journey.
This is awesome. I want to thank our guests for appearing on the show and answering these questions, because I think this is going to be probably one of the more popular videos out there. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to comment below. Let me know what content you want to watch. Give me some feedback, and we'll check you out next time. You guys stay safe. Cheers.